Well, when it came down to human resource allocation, the allocation of the most important resource on our planet, we're like an F minus. Over the course of the last 5 or 6 years, I've been really particularly focused on decentralization. Sublime Society is not a small ambition, put it that way. And in a nutshell, the concept is to create a digital society which is fully decentralized. And the acronym for LAW stands for Love, Art, and Wisdom, an education system which is built to optimize humanity as a resource. You're actually creating a whole system and a whole structure which is rewarding people according to the actual contribution that those people are making to the community. Contribute your energy, raise your frequency, and increase your vibes.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for listening and watching. Today, I'm really excited because I have a guest with whom I can discuss one of the most fascinating uh, topics. It is about the highest art of all, as described by Aristotle, which is the art of governing, the art of political science or politics. My guest is called. He goes by the handle Mood, and he has very interesting and high ambitions. He wants to contribute to a better society in a project that he calls Sublime Society. Hi, Mood. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Rogerio. Good to be here.
So I would like to ask, what drove you to having this goal, this very high and lofty goal, and probably very challenging of rethinking society, basically?
Yeah, it's been something that I've been thinking about for quite a few years now. And I guess slowly the pieces have just been coming together in my mind. Um, Essentially, I've been working in the space of technology for a good chunk of my career. So, the best part of the last 20 years have been working within internet technologies in particular, but always with a kind of, a consumer brand eye to them as well. So I'm not a developer myself, but I work with developers building architecting systems and creating consumer concepts. So kind of quite a broad career, but it's been focused largely around internet. And over the course of the last 5 or 6 years, I've been really particularly focused on decentralization, and I'm one of the co-founders of Edge Network, which is a peer-to-peer cloud infrastructure. Um, and just through my kind of workings with Edge, building that out, and just as a general point of interest as well, I've always been very much focused on the concept of decentralization and interested in it. And I'm kind of a fervent believer in it. In the future of everything, decentralization should really be, just we should decentralize as much as we possibly can. So it's just kind of, that all coming together over the course of the last few years has kind of brought this idea, this concept in my head, to a point which is where it's at right now, which is the concept of sublime society and what we're doing with that. And Sublime Society is not a small ambition, put it that way. And in a nutshell, the concept is to create a digital society which is fully decentralized. So it's an architecture of a system to enable that to happen. So at the bottom end of it, you've got the concept of a digital identity, which is a going to be using what's called a soulbound token. So this just is like an NFC, but you can't trade it, you can't sell it around. So it functions more as like a passport or a CV. So metadata will be updated over the course of a time. With records of your interactions and participations within the broader society recorded, so as that you can participate in groups and be rewarded accordingly. Then the second layer is a governance layer, which essentially acts as the an open governance system where decisions are made for the community as a whole, so that ultimately everything will be filtered through the governance layer. Individual communities will have their own kind of set rules, but the broader societal rules will be developed by the community as a whole. And there's a system for enabling that to happen fairly as well. So the concept is more focused around kind of participation-based rewards. So you're rewarding people for actually kind of contributing to the community in any manner, but through their actual contributions rather than kind of purely monetary. So it doesn't, it's a harder system. It's a harder system to kind of game and control based on just how much money people have got. It's going to be based more on how much they participate in the community. And then there's this essentially three components above that, which are where the actual societal activity happens. So this is, interfaces for products and services which consumers, members of the community, will be able to participate in. So ultimately, you've got a commerce angle, which is buying and selling of products. You've got an arts angle, which is going to be a broad media concept for decentralized arts, and you've got education concept, which is going to be focused around essentially more a wisdom, open source, open curriculum concept. So it's a big, broad idea, but yeah, this is the foundations of it right here.
The essentials that you've described, they seem to hold much promise because they can be explained in very few lines, which is really it gives me hope that it will have a chance to succeed, because people are so often overwhelmed by complex rule systems in societies. We commonly call most of them laws. Legal systems, legal frameworks are extremely complex, and they tend to accumulate complexity over time, and no one person can understand thoroughly the laws. And on the other hand, it seems to me that society benefits from having a proper education system that makes most of the laws, the moral normatization laws that enforce people to behave, make these laws a bit more redundant. Because, as Pythagoras said once, as soon as laws are necessary for men, they are no longer fit for freedom. And so, if we build a society composed of wicked people that are always trying to game the system, that are always on only on for themselves and think little about contributing to the common good or the common weal, as the old English Thomas More would talk about.
Mhm.
Um, then we have problems. We will need force to make society, at least a shadow of a society, function. And so I really think that it's really interesting that you gave a good emphasis on the essentials, the society being based on essentials, not a lot of um, added systems and subsystems. And you have a really nice emphasis on art and education, which are so important to elevate um, the minds of human individuals.
It briefly the other day, but I have this concept in my head that our law is an acronym, and the acronym for law stands for love, art, and wisdom. And the concept behind that is products and services made with love that put people on the planet above profit. Art, in terms of the importance of using our imagination as a society, and to bring back the concepts within nurtured into society, whereby we're actually promoting the use of imagination rather than inhibiting the use of imagination, closing it off, which is what we do. Our current education system around the world does. And then this concept of wisdom, which is focused on an education system which is built to optimize humanity as a resource. I've always said this concept, and this is one of the things which kind of got me going along the education aspect. Um, I came up with this concept of what I called open curriculum a few years ago, which was this idea whereby society creates, the optimal curriculum to teach children and people of all ages. Because I don't think education should ever stop, really, but just to kind of create an education system that optimizes the resource of humans. Because if you look at it, I've also said, like, if aliens came down to our planet and had a quick recce and just looked down and said, well, who's the dominant species? It's humans. How well are they performing? Well, when it came down to human resource allocation, the allocation of the most important resource on our planet, we're like an F minus. We're so badly. I mean, it's just awful. We create a system of education that rewards the few, not the many. And it's a postcode lottery about where in the world that you're born, and if you're born in a big chunk of the world right now, you've got pretty much zero chance of actually having the kind of education which would lead to a career which is we're lucky to have in certain parts of the West here. So, like, it's just not the same around the world. And I think one of the parts about that is just we could do it so much better. And so the concept of creating a kind of a curriculum which was sitting outside of any religious or political ideologies whatsoever, or anything which is going to veer that curriculum off in the direction of a subject which will benefit governments around the world rather than individuals. I think that's such an important thing to do for us as a society. So this aspect of Sublime Society is going to be focused on that, an open curriculum, which is going to be something which it starts small, but it grows over time. Essentially, like a Wikipedia of wisdom, I call it. Which is just objective, just discussion around points, and then we collectively as a society objectively create this curriculum which provides just a much broader kind of subject structure, which doesn't kind of narrow down thinking within schools of subject based classroom teaching, which all we're doing really is we're just breeding a generation of robots, people who are rewarded for memorizing things, and then the people who memorize those things the best go off into the best universities, and then they end up getting the best jobs. So you're basically rewarding society by we're creating society rewarding the people who are the best at doing what they're told, rather than the best of thinking outside of the box, thinking critically, collaborative kind of creativity, all those things which are really important to do, we don't do at school right now. So I think this concept of reforming the broad curriculum and doing that digitally online is a great starting point from where society needs to go. And I think once you've got that curriculum in place, then what you're doing is you're opening up the actual education market itself. So no longer do people you have to. It's no longer a postcode lottery in terms of you have to live near a good university, or have the means to attend a good university. Rather, you create a platform for kind of open teaching as well, whereby anybody can address any area of the broader curriculum that they want to focus their efforts on. And then it's just going to be a case of creating a digital classroom, and then the cream rises to the top. So the best teachers around the world will have a big broad audience according to how well they're actually performing and teaching that part of the curriculum that they're focused and interested on. And I think by doing that, we are creating a much more level playing field for both students and also teachers as well. So yeah, that's the kind of concept. I think beyond that, the layer beyond the application layer for education. So you've got the curriculum, then the application layer. Beyond that, you can start thinking about, this is really efficient resource allocation. So I think to create to create your identity, which is like you essentially start your decentralized identity will be with you from when you're kind of learning different subjects and then beyond. And so once you've done that, you can start recording how well people, how much focus and attention people have given various different subject areas, and then that will be updated onto their identity, which is essentially like a CV. So that CV then passes with them with all their interactions within the community. So you therefore have this CV which is focused on areas which are um, more detailed and not so kind of restricted to certain focus and subjects, but rather the skills and attributes required in order to do a specific job. So, from a recruiter perspective, they are therefore in the future going to be able to recruit according to a much more specific set of skill requirements than we have in the kind of employment economy right now, which again puts people into buckets and subjects and kind of very much kind of controlled, if you know what I mean.
This is one of the topics that I really love most. You are by no means not the first that wants to and aims to reform and rebuild a better functioning society. I would like to just give a few examples that might inspire you and also the listeners or viewers. Way back then, Plato also wanted to create a better functioning society. He described it in his Republic. He even tried to make this work at King Dionysius' court, um, and failed miserably because there was one thing in his way, in the way of progress, and it was a narcissistic personality, King Dionysius. This was clear to me. Many years after, uh, close to where you are talking from, um, during the time of Henry VIII, Thomas More also tried to conceptualize a better functioning society by firstly criticizing how society was working in 15th, 16th century England. He criticized how the church was working in collusion with government and was creating inequality, huge inequality. Basically, they were the rich people at the time were trying to maximize wool production for textiles production, and they were expropriating farming lands from common folk, who were then turned into beggars at best or thieves at worst. And at the time, they would punish thievery and murder with exactly the same punishment, which was execution. So basically, if someone was aiming to rob, they would also uncallously murder as well if necessary, because they knew that the same punishment was reserved to them. And so society was at a crisis at that time. There were also other many other thinkers more recently. One of them is called Jacques Fresco from the USA, who conceptualized a social system called the Venus Project that was primarily based on a resource-based economy, where a centralized computer interface would allocate resources according to the needs of the individual citizens of the system. Um, and it had a huge emphasis also on functioning and sustainable architecture and energy production as well. However, these systems from Plato, Thomas More, and Jacques Fresco clearly show the utmost importance of when we want to build a society. the building blocks of the society must be of the most exceptional quality. And the building blocks I'm talking about clearly the individuals. If you try to implement a system, say communism according to Trotsky or Lenin, and it's composed by narcissistic personalities, as it was historically, especially at the top, things will go extremely wrong. There will be genocide, atrocities, there will be expropriation of resources from the common folk, as also I've given the example of Thomas More, or simply the narcissistic personality of the ruler, as in the case of Plato trying to implement his republic in King Dionysius' kingdom. Um, Plato barely fled the island with his head on his shoulders, because he was kind of antagonizing King Dionysius' extremely narcissistic personality by trying to change the system, change the status quo. And unfortunately, when these egomaniacal, narcissistic personalities are in power, they kind of conflate their power, their position, their status with their own personality. And so any challenge to their position will be met with a response by them of typically anger and hostility, likely even atrocity. Just to give another example of the implementation of capitalism, so-called capitalism, in the West, we have a system that basically has some meritocratic characteristics, as you also emphasize in your system. However, clearly, capitalism, as it is implemented in most countries that I know about, the USA, UK, most of Europe as well, um, it is a system that is extremely prone to abuse, in the sense that people accumulate resources, these so-called entrepreneurs, capitalists, monopolists. For example, Jeff Bezos accumulated a lot of clout in um, the retail sector, and he held on to his monopoly so firmly that any challenger, smaller challenger that appeared and has appeared throughout the years, he does everything to undermine them, and even buy them out, to purchase them, to keep his position as a monopolist completely unchallenged. And this is, of course, not in the best interest of the consumers, who find themselves with lower choice. And so, besides an extremely high quality system of educating individuals, so that the individual themselves are of the best upstanding character and best intellect and capacity for empathy as possible, we also need people, individuals in a society, to have choice, to have choices. This is so important. And you can say that capitalism is implemented and there is a free market, but if we see people finding themselves wanting to use a service or a product, and they end up sending all their money to the same organization, or the same individuals, it basically defeats the purpose of there being a free market, of there being choice. There is an illusion of choice in many sectors. Yeah, and so these are clearly some of the problems: narcissistic personalities, the tendency of these faulty personalities to abuse systems, social systems, and also the need for a really high quality education system that can consistently produce exceptionally high quality people in terms of character, first and foremostly, and then intellect as well. Also, in terms of education, I cannot stress the importance of this aspect of education enough. In my personal experience, education basically mind raped me and my colleagues with a lot of knowledge, with tons of knowledge that we needed um, to integrate in our minds and then output in tests, in exams to show that we learned. And of course, a decade after school, most of that is has gone to the rot of memory loss because we by being so
Go on.
um, imposed with huge buckets of knowledge while we are at school. This has at least two um, uh, extremely undesirable effects. The first one is it makes people hate learning, especially self-directed learning. Schools are kind of miserable at producing self-learning persons. In my experience, I spent almost a decade kind of reeling from this traumatic experience and not wanting anything to do with learning anymore. I just worked in my career. That's it. And after a decade, I resumed my self-learning experience by trying to learn as much as possible about the best philosophy that has been produced by humanity in general. But it's such a waste that school makes people hate learning. And another thing that schools typically do that is it's sinister. It only focuses mainly on the intellect, and as we've both mentioned, the memorizing part of the intellect and following scripts or following commands or orders, basically producing office or factory workers. And we don't need to examine school very thoroughly to figure out that schools are not consistently outputting entrepreneurs or leaders that are so sorely needed in society. If we had better quality leaders consistently arriving at young adulthood, we would at least have people that are better at figuring out, identifying poor leaders, narcissistic, egomaniacal personalities, and voting them out, or at least not even letting them inscribe their names in ballots. These people need to be as far away from positions of power as possible. And then also, if we have more people that are good leaders in society, the standard of philosopher king that Plato talked about, and Marcus Aurelius embodied, Ashoka the Great, after converting to Buddhism, also embodied it. Lycurgus from Sparta also was an example of an upstanding character who leaded with wisdom. Or Solon of Athens, who would say things like, for example, let me check. Okay, so Solon would say things about leadership and governance like learn to obey before you command. So, especially teens and youth and young adults need to be under high quality leadership so that they can have a role model to figure out what consists of good leadership. So when they acquire more experience and wisdom through experience of leading and dealing with organizations and social systems, they have a chance to decide to uplift themselves also into leaders. And we need high quality leaders, as I've mentioned. Also, he would say, uh, men keep agreements when it is to the advantage of neither to break them. And so mood as you create a society, a new society. If you create a society where people are incentivized to contribute to society, and they even uh, are rewarded merely by the act of contributing, or even if just the psychological feeling of I'm doing something for the common good, even beyond just the the CV that you mentioned, that is a really solid way of um, annotating or recording what that person has contributed to the society in a fail proof kind of way. Uh, if there is this kind of organizational culture of
Yeah,
contributing, of my duty to this society, to this organization, is to contribute. It is basically a form of love. Um, to also quote Khalil Gibran, he has a chapter on work, and he said, just to quote a really small passage, he said, "All work is empty save when there is love." And then he would say, "And when you work with love, you bind yourself to yourself and to one another and to God, to the sublime, basically."
I love
Um, I also highlight that I have no idea if there is God, if what God is and what not. I have even no idea if humanity will ever figure out this question. So I could be classified as an ichtheist. But anyway, when we connect to the higher power or to what is fundamental in the universe or what is essential, that is what is considered sublime. And so it's really fascinating that you chose that word.
that is fascinating. I mean, there's a hell of a lot to unpack with what you've just gone through there, but so many aspects of what you've just been talking about are very, very relevant to the concept of the creation of a decentralized society. And I think the concept of centralization and the ego around narcissistic leaders, and how that contributes to a skewed society which doesn't work in the best interests of society rather than the best interests of individuals. And I think so long as we have politics of any form, that's always going to remain the case, because ultimately the role of politicians is, well, the primary purpose of a politician is retaining power. So they'll always do whatever it takes to retain power, and that includes lying, and that includes not acting in the best interests of the populace, and so on and so forth. So that kind of human behavior will always remain in place no matter what happens. So I think whatever solution decentralization can provide, this is a point of difference versus the current status quo of politics around the world. In that it can be different. It can be something which is created from scratch and isn't beholden to the same kind of the structure, systems, etc., that the kind of centralization is right now. So you can kind of take ego out of the equation, because you don't make this about any one individual. Rather, this is about the kind of collective. And there'll be names of accounts involved in this, but it's not going to be delivered in the same way in which it's not going to be about individuals. This is around society as a whole. So I think there's a very interesting point there about what decentralization from a societal perspective, what kind of a decentralized framework can offer, that is a massive point of difference against what centralization offers right now. So I think that's kind of an interesting part of it. Then where did you go from there? Um, yeah, the concept of participate society, which is based on kind of participation based. So I think this is really, really, really important, because the way that we're building this society out, and I kind of give a bit of a concept here, which is actually quite nice, because I do firmly believe that whatever happens in society, it's got to be a participation based society. That's the core thing, whereby we are rewarding according to the actual contribution of an individual, rather than the current model works within the job industries. You get tiers of management, and often you get, the higher you get, often you get the best work coming out from some of the most junior people in the company, but or the people who are highly talented, but just don't have the kind of the personality to stand up in a room and get the promotion to top job kind of thing. So you end up having or company structures which often just reward the people who shout the loudest. And I think that kind of concept of rewarding the people who shout the loudest, to the most extrovert or whatever, rewarding those often creates this kind of society, both within kind of corporate, but also political and everything, whereby you just have this kind of skew in society, with the people who shout the loudest are the people that get the top jobs and stuff like that. Whereas, the work's actually being done by people who aren't rewarded for the kind of greatness of the work they actually do. Whereas in this society, you're actually creating a whole system and a whole structure which is rewarding people according to the actual contribution that those people are making to the community. And that's being done in a way which is like, essentially, it's done through validation from the people that you are working with in your society. So if you're involved in a project, people that you're working with, your peers, are actually saying, yeah, that person works in that. So you're kind of giving them the thumbs up, or a scoring system, which is based on a weighting model, so that you can see people in the community are saying that that person did that job well. So it could be any job, could be a developer, a designer, a content writer, it could be whatever, somebody who's involved in selling or community management, whatever job that person is contributing towards a particular part of the society. Their peers will say that person is doing that job well, and therefore you're building up this score, which is then attributed to your identification, so that when it comes down to the kind of compensation, whatever it is for that project, or whatever is happening for that particular project, the rewards are all allocated accordingly to kind of individual contribution and participation within the community, rather than based on this kind of structured system, which is putting high weighting towards kind of people who shout the loudest, that kind of thing. So I think it's a quite a very interesting system on that concept. And the model that we've come up with as well, which is you can tell, you can see I'm maybe a fan of Tesla on this instance, but the concept that we've come up with is um, contribute your energy, raise your frequency, and increase your vibes. And vibes is vibes, vibrations is going to be the currency of Sublime Society. So vibes is the concept. So the whole concept is contribute your energy. That means participate in whatever aspect of the society that you want to participate in. So that could be, it could be a group, it could be a community group, it could be a project to create a new product or service together. It could be the creation of a concept for the media channel. So maybe a community made film or something. It could be whatever. It doesn't matter. So there's going to be so many broad ranges of subjects. So you contribute your energy into the subjects that you're interested in. You raise your frequency by doing good work within the community, and therefore your peers will say that person has contributed to here, so on and so forth. And then as a result of that, the higher your frequency, the higher your weighting of vibe allocation, which is a kind of, the vibe is the token, the currency of the ecosystem. So that's how we'll be rewarding people for their contributions to any projects, is going to be through the allocation of vibe currency. So it's basically a much fairer system, broadly speaking, which kind of does that. And then the concept of vibes, this is the concept is to create a lot of sub communities. So when it comes down to building a society, I think I think we need to go back towards community living. We're all forced. Societies and cultures are just thrust upon us, and in the world that we live in today, whereby it's put under the guise of kind of multiculturalism. Yeah, but great, but also at the same time, cultures are the most beautiful, wonderful things in the world that just need to be maintained and respected. And it's the differences that makes them so brilliant as well. Whereas we are kind of like forced in society to exist in this kind of homogenous space whereby we're all thrust upon everything, all societies and cultures are thrust upon each other, and it's all put into a blender. It's just kind of meant to be the same. Whereas I think it's very important to have societies and have different cultures around the world, and also to maintain and respect them. So from a kind of structural perspective, the way Sublime Society is going to work is that the Sublime Society governance will be, that this will be the place where the broad rules for the overall society will exist. So to discuss as a community things like what is the kind of taxation system going to be for our overall community? How does it work? Because there are some rules which need to be formed at a kind of a broad overall governance layer, but a critical part of Sublime Society working is just an acceptance as society that we are different, cultures are different, not everyone's going to agree on anything. So a core part of the activity needs to happen within the communities. So the communities, they sit within the society. So you've got the broad rules of the society, but the communities exist within the society itself. And so you can participate in whatever communities that you want, and the sub communities will be able to a degree, form the rules of their sub communities themselves. So long as they're adhering to the kind of the broad societal kind of agreement that everybody, all the different communities, and everybody has kind of defined and created themselves. Because there's this is a road to decentralization. We need to start with this concept and system, then build to it over time. But as I said, a core part of doing that is communities themselves. So it's that kind of conjoined of communities existing, and just collaborating with each other, but kind of working within this kind of broad kind of set of rules which everybody's agreed to, which has been completely defined by participation based metric. So, people's voices will be heard if they are contributing in whatever way. So it's kind of a weighted system, which just means that, ultimately decisions will be made in the best interest of everybody rather than, in the best interest of the few. So that's kind of the direction.
Yeah, I would also like to clarify that when you were talking about Tesla, you were talking about Nikola Tesla, not the car and energy company. And Tesla
Yeah,
was an extremely
yeah,
brilliant individual who could conceptualize inventions in 3D in his mind before he even created them. And he is, for the most part, self-directed, self-learning, was a self-learning individual. And so, basically, a treasure for society that we need more people like him in not in just his field but in all fields. Nikola Tesla was a guy who said this: if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. And so I think this constitutes your inspiration for what you described as
yeah,
people raising their vibe. And it is really, really important. It also reminds me about Taoism or Taoism, which talks about we figuring out what is the vibration or the tendency of nature or of the universe. And instead of trying to go against it, like a surfer trying to surf against the direction of the waves, we figure out what the waves are doing, and we become exceptionally proficient at cresting those waves. and doing this analogous to what the surfer does, but in all sectors, or in all walks of life, in all professions, in all kinds of activities, to figure out how can I do this in a way that is pleasurable, that is effortless, that I will reap rewards in terms of experience and excellency in workmanship and craftsmanship. And all the while I'm doing this, I'm uplifting society, I'm contributing to society. So even just by doing something uh, kind of commonplace in the society, in the society that you're conceiving, people are just going with the flow, and they are being rewarded even in multiple dimensions from their contribution. uh, Spiritual rewarding by being in community with other people. uh, that is kind of like the approach that I'm trying to convey here with the word spiritual. It just means something beyond the physical world, which means the social connections between people are being strengthened, are being fostered. And you cannot describe social connections physically very easily. And so we need to go beyond physics to use metaphysical concepts of saying these people are together as an organization and they are working harmoniously. And so this kind of something else besides the physical bodies and physical tools and stuff that people are using in this society, there is something else at work here: the strong connections between individuals. And I think that it is really important to figure out the repeated actions, the repeated rituals of your society that you're aiming to construct. This, I say, inspired on Confucius, who really highlighted, he could not stress this enough. People who are civilized are mostly civilized by what they do repeatedly. And he would use the word ritual, such as when people do a ceremony that celebrates an achievement, for instance. uh, People need to be doing this ceremony reverently. They need to be, in the ceremony. They need to be in the zone. They need to be paying attention. They need to be doing this with meaning. It needs to be meaningful to them. Uh, for example, if you have a newcomer arrive at your society, I think it is not something to just brush off as, just someone arrived, but I think it's good to make them feel welcome. It's good to have a good onboarding process, that regardless of where the person comes from, regardless of if they have some traumas from society, or if regardless of them being male or female, or consider them being something else, or regardless of them being from a Western background or an Eastern or Middle Eastern background. Well, regardless of that, I think it's really important that the society welcomes them well, and then in every step of their um, learning curve, they're becoming more proficient at being this citizen of your society. It's really useful and important that there be these kinds of social habits or social rituals that kind of celebrate these milestones through which people go through. It is extremely essential in every society, from rudimentary hunter-gatherer tribal societies to the most enlightened societies. It's really important, for example, for there to be a kind of rite of passage from youth to adulthood that kind of celebrates this passage. and also makes the individuals welcome to basically a new stage of collaboration within society. And so I think it pays for you in as being a designer of a society to, beyond all the software part, to also have in mind these kinds of procedures or rituals or habits or whatnot, to kind of give soul to the society, to give more soul to the society, to foster a culture of positivity, of uplifting individual human beings, of uplifting minds, of uplifting what we could call their hearts as well, to make them people, individuals with ever increasing levels of upstanding character. You also mentioned that in many organizations, the people that are the loudest and not necessarily the most technically competent rise to the top. Well, that is unfortunate, but there are antidotes to that. I found antidotes to that, for instance, in Stoicism, where the four cardinal virtues of Stoicism are called courage, justice, wisdom, and temperance. Temperance meaning moderation. And how can you become, by being a technically proficient person, also become an influencer person in that field, or a leader in that field, a proeminent person? So you can, besides being a technically proficient person, you can also be kind of a tutor to others who have less experience. You can lead teams of persons that are working in that kind of domain, as you mentioned in the software, the IT space, where you also, as I've understood, also assume that kind of role. For persons that are kind of fearful to participate or to speak in public, these people, they need to go through several steps of a process in which they practice courageous acts, small courageous acts at first, and then bigger ones, bigger ones, bigger ones. And if persons go through this learning curve of building their courage, their self-esteem as well, their fearfulness when dealing with talking in public, um, you will find that almost any person is potentially a public speaker. Almost any person is potentially a leader. Every single person in their psyche, they possess, even if just the seed of leadership, the seed of speaking eloquently in public, of doing something courageous for other persons as well, selfless acts as well. Uh, every single person has goodness in potential within them. It can only be flourished if it is nurtured over time, over long periods of time, which comes back to what you are doing in general. You are kind of planting, in a sense, a date tree, uh, assuming that it will grow and flourish, your Sublime Society. Probably this will be something that will transcend even your lifetime, even anyone's lifetime who is living today. Um, this is a very long game that we are talking about here.
Yeah.
When we think about creating a society, just like a date tree, it takes like more than 100 years to give fruits. Um,
Yeah.
and so what greater demonstration of selflessness, of service to humankind could there be than being kind of a pioneer of creating a system that, if successful, it will outlive the founder or founders? And so, to me, the utmost, highest criteria of exceptional leadership is, it's not only leading others that follow, just follow, even maybe mindlessly. It's not just creating other leaders. The highest standard of leadership is creating systems that outlive the leader. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, that's one of the reasons why I think your ambitions are so inspiring.
That's very kind of you to say that. I think ultimately, I just believe I think that's great to hear, but I just think it's essential like that this happens because we're just stuck in a rut. Society is totally up shit creek without a paddle at the moment in every aspect of it, isn't it? Like, we just society is just created to divide us and these divisions within society just seems to be getting worse and worse and worse. And I think at the end of the day, we're not born to hate each other in any capacity. We're just not. So you go to any corner of the world, and just walking along the street, average person you bump into, you'll always chat to them. You'll always we're not like pit bulls fighting each other. I mean, it's just not like that. So it's society that forms us to be like that. So I think it's this is not just like really a choice. I think this has to happen. You know what I mean? It has to happen. Otherwise, society is really, it doesn't have. It's got a bit of a bleaky future ahead of it. So long as we have governments, so long as we have society that rewards the haves and the have-nots, and continually exacerbates the difference between the rich and the poor, it's just getting worse and worse and worse, isn't it? The distribution of wealth, etc. So long as we have these centralized systems or pillars of control, I call them, governments, finance, big business, media, education, religion. So long as we have these systems or pillars of control that dominate our society, we'll always be going in the wrong direction. So, the way I look at it is that we're starting something here, but it is going to take far longer than our lifetimes to actually execute fully. But we can make some very good progress here and right now. It's got to start somewhere. The technology is already there. It's already available. For the full. I mean, you could build this thing out fully right now with the technology that we have to hand right now already. But we don't do it because whatever we build as a world is always centralized. There's always shareholders, there's always profit, there's always regulatory systems that have to, work within certain, governance of certain companies in terms of countries, in terms of company setup, etc. All of these things are prohibitive, and all of these things are restrictive to what has to be done. We've got to build something society from a complete decentralized perspective. So the way I look at it, you can just think you got two buckets next to each other. One is the decentralized bucket and one is the centralized bucket, and these are the buckets of society. And in the one bucket you've got sand brimming to the top, and that's centralized. And then in the decentralized bucket there's no sand in it whatsoever right now, none. Yeah, because even our decentralized projects are focused are too centralized. If you look at big things in crypto like Binance and Coinbase and things like that, they're all systems. It's not decentralized. So we are just the first people at the top of the bucket with sand on it, and we've got our spades. We're just chucking sand into the decentralized bucket, and it's going to take hundreds of years to flick all that sand across fully. But we can make a big start on it right here, right now, with the technologies that we've already got to hand right now. So we just got to focus on doing this right. And that means, like, from an architectural perspective, infrastructure, we really just focus purely on what decentralization has to be. Yeah, and we do that in such a way that we are creating the blueprint for a digital society which functions in the best optimal way possible, that serves people and the planet ahead of just individual gain, individual profit. People can still make money. People can still get rich by participating in the communities, because hopefully we'll begin to build products and services that are decentralized and used by members of the decentralized community, that ultimately start chipping away at that centralized bucket, and we start taking revenues away from the centralized economy and putting them into the decentralized economy, but just distributing them more fairly. And that more fair distribution will hopefully broaden out the economy and broaden out society, and just just lead us to hopefully one day getting to that tipping point whereby there are more people participating in the decentralized society than there are in the centralized society. And I think when we eventually get to that point, then we can start talking about physical infrastructure, because I think, and this is visionary, this is very much kind of like vision down the line stuff, but if you look at the way in which we distribute ourselves as individuals around the world, it's not very efficient. Why do we have such huge rates of poverty around the world and hunger around the world, when food literally grows on trees, all over the whole world? Yeah, so also the population crisis, I think, in many respects is, it's a bit of a um, a fallacy, to be honest with you, because like the world is so big. I was reading recently, every single person in the world could get plot of land, a small plot of land enough to have a kind of a front yard and small family holding in Texas, and it would only take up 75% of the entire state. So that's just to put into context how big the world is. Yet we're led to believe that it's small and we've got a population crisis because we pen everybody into cities. And this is like the kind of the growth of urbanism. Like urbanism is a true religion of the Romans. Building the roads, the towns, the cities, they are, there's obviously benefits of having cities, if somebody who's lived in a city most of their lives, but like at the end of the day, they're not great for everybody and for the people on the planet. I mean, we just don't need half of this bollocks that we've got in the world. Like the transportation networks, the kind of global supply chains, the products and services. Probably 95% of what we consume is just a total waste of time. We don't even need it whatsoever. So I think to kind of a return in society to a more community orientated society, which has got far less kind of you know traveling in terms of commuting, and the kind of the short haul kind of like travel that we do so much within our society. We don't need to do all that. I think kind of ultimately restructuring society so that it's more community and commune based, so that you can choose to live in parts of society that you want to, and participate in that, but you just travel around less and you build up communities and food systems and structures and accommodations network, which are just better for the planet and better for everybody. So this is kind of longer term stuff, but I see no reason why a decentralized society couldn't ultimately progress one day to start having making the decisions from a kind of a utility perspective. So we are we've got to that tipping point where we're like, well, we don't need to spend trillions on defense budget anymore, because we are a global society that kind of can, we've got enough people of us who just agreeing to this kind of living by this law that we've all collectively agreed upon, and so on and so forth. So we don't need to spend trillions on nuclear bombs anymore. You know what I mean? So there's so many things that this concept of a decentralized society could kind of evolve and grow into. So yeah, it is beyond the scope of kind of any one lifetime for sure. But I think it's got to start somewhere, and we've got the tools at our disposal now to make that happen. So why not be the first people to kind of make it happen?
As you say, it's a huge challenge even to think about where to start, because there is so much that is easily identifiably wrong with how overall society is failing nowadays, how it's reeling, how it is in a rut, how it is uh, it is generating colossal amounts of waste from human resources, from how it educates individuals, how it deals with resources. Uh, I cannot overstate um, how truly mediocre things are, but I can only express the concept of how things are wrong by, in
yeah,
comparison, trying to describe something of excellence. And I think that for your system, or for anyone wanting to create a functional society, they, in opposition of a system that is already implemented, or other systems, it needs to overshadow them by such a visible margin that people will opt out for the currently existing legacy society systems that are plagued with so many problems. To summarize completely in this conversation, that people will opt into your sublime society. For instance, um, I am reminded of one of the greatest individuals of my city of Coimbra, which is called Bisaya Barreto. He is called Bisaya Barreto, who during the 19th century here in Portugal, here in Coimbra, where we had a tuberculosis pandemic that was ravaging the population, especially young children. There were a lot of orphaned children as well. This guy, Bisai Barreto, he was born into a wealthy family. He inherited a lot of financial resources and property. He could have just gone along with the flow and just used the wealth for his self benefit. He did not. He opened many schools that accepted children from both the most deprived sectors of society to the wealthiest. He wanted to normalize and make a more equal society. His contribution clearly shows today, even if our society here has still many flaws. But it's his the ripples that he created can be seen even today. There are still institutions working here that were founded by him and accept children from different social strata, like kindergartens and schools as well. And I think that one of the most important, most essential starting points for a functional society is to start with an education system that goes from the beginning of life to the end of life, that comprises the entirety of human life, of the human lifespan, that facilitates especially self-directed learning in whatever age a person is in. And if, for example, you manage to have integrated in your system an educational system that is by far much more excellent than what is on the market today, both in public and private education, probably because you might integrate the best lessons from human history, from the best thinkers that have their lessons survived up to today, that highlighted the importance of self development in dimensions of self way broader than just the intellect. For instance, be, before teaching children to read or to write, teach the children how they are part of a greater whole, that they cannot sever the ties between themselves and, for instance, nature. We do not, as Jacques Fresco used to say, we do not see the power cord coming uh, out of our asses and connecting us to nature. But if you remove all oxygen in the atmosphere, we die. If you remove the plant life, we die. If you turn off the sun, the plants will die, and then we die. And so we only see our separation from everything around us, be it society, other people, our community, nature overall, uh, only because we are deluding ourselves. If we really examine our place in the world, in the biosphere of Earth, we are basically the benefactors, the 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 people who benefit from their existing microorganisms, fungal mycelium, plants flourishing, phytoplankton producing most of the oxygen on Earth, the animals that nourish people who eat animals, the plants that nourish most people eat vegetables and whatnot. And so, uh, before we start sharpening people's intellect without working on the other more fundamental aspects of being, we need to highlight to children, to younger individuals, how important it is to figure out what they are ultimately, how they are connected, uh, in such a way that the connections cannot be severed fully. Otherwise, life does not happen. So that people can embrace their pursuit of improving their intellect, of becoming more influential in society by becoming leaders, by becoming public speakers, by becoming teachers as well, by maintaining a good dose of humility throughout their entire lives. And one of the components of this humility is people figuring out that we are just mortals. We we won't be here forever on this plane of existence. Our lifetime is has an end. It has a beginning and an end. We must not delude ourselves that we are immortal or eternal, which could produce certain kinds of delusions like grandiosity or egocentrism or narcissism. We need to kind of nip that problem in the bud uh, at the start, as early as possible, because if you just in society that just focuses on sharpening the people's intellect, you can have people that have sharpened intellect to the utmost, and basically we have in history people like that who were basically in Nazi Germany, the top German officials. They were people who scored in IQ tests extremely high, but they were deformed individuals, in the sense that the other components of what it means to be human, they were severely underdeveloped in this wisdom of having a self-awareness in terms of emotional intelligence, in terms of awareness of their connection to the broader whole of being, of existence. And as we've seen in history, I don't need to describe it much more. It produces disharmony in society and in the world overall. And so, if I would recommend you one place to start, it would really be in how we uplift human individuals, not in the sense to foster individuality, in the sense that people are disconnected, they are kind of pursuing their individual interests, self-interests, like Adam Smith would talk about, but in the sense that they are conscious that they will always be a part of a community of other individuals. They will always be part of nature, because that is just how things work fundamentally in the universe, in the cosmos, in this ordered cosmos. And so, the sooner people gain a grasp of this reality, of their connection to the whole, and also their mortality, these fundamental truths, people will get their crap together early on in their lives. They will fix the holes that they might have been born with in their mind, in their psyche. They will correct or compensate the distortions of personality they might have been born with, because in the womb people also are subjected to experiences, and they might be born with some bent towards some personality problems, uh, for instance, egoism, or they might be too timid, for instance. And people need to have self-awareness of those kinds of tendencies and correct them, like one would bend a crooked piece of wood into being straight by bending it counter to the current bend. This is inspired by Aristotle, for instance. But I would also like to quote two thinkers, one from ancient times, who was Lao Tzu, who had a few ideas about building society that was uh, boiled down to the essentials, and it would work flawlessly because nothing is being imposed. So he would say, if you want to be a great leader, you must learn to follow the Tao. Stop trying to control. Let go of fixed plans and concepts, and the world will govern itself. How do I think this is so? Because in this world, the greater the restrictions and prohibitions, the more people are impoverished. The more advanced the weapons of state, the darker the nation. The more artful and crafty the plan, the stranger the outcome. The more laws are posted, the more thieves appear. Therefore, the sage says, I take no action and people are reformed. I enjoy peace and people become honest. I do nothing and people become rich. If I keep from imposing on people, they become themselves. And the other thinker, he's still alive today. Uh, and he also inspires
That's
me
great.
greatly with his book called Reinventing Organizations, that I really recommend to you if you haven't yet been acquainted with this book. His name is Frederick Laloux. He seemingly, now that I have the a broader knowledge of ancient thinkers, um, from ancient times to the Enlightenment, I can tell how he probably was inspired by the best ideas of building society, of building organizations in his book, and so I cannot recommend it enough for someone like yourself. And so, to quote one of his passage, he talks about having an inner rightness as compass. He says, when we are fused with our ego, we are driven to make decisions informed by external factors, what others will think or what outcomes can be achieved. In the evolutionary system of organization that he calls the Thiel's evolutionary system, he says we shift from external to internal yardsticks in our decision making. We are now concerned with the question of inner rightness. Does this decision seem right? Am I being true to myself? Is this in line with who I sense I'm called to become? Am I being of service to the world?
You always fill my mind with brilliant quotes. I'm just quite in awe as to how you do it. You're really fantastic. But there's some good stuff there.
Yeah, I kind of this is kind of the fruits of the investment I started making a year and a half ago. It's also a long game, as your construction of your Sublime Society. So basically, what I'm doing is every single day I listen to audiobooks from the best thinkers that I know about from human history, regardless of the location on Earth, uh, regardless of them have being lived in China, India, ancient Greece, Egypt, Italy, whatever, Rome. I'm trying to get a sense of what is the best ideas that have been produced in human history, and the first person to benefit has been myself. For instance, besides reading and getting knowledge by myself, by my self direction, every single day since September 2021. This investment has been bearing fruits on myself. I have become less fearful of approaching other persons. I've been more courageous to speak in public. I have started taking cold showers after working out, which has been really helping my health. It really strengthens the circulatory and immune systems. And so, if you have a healthy body and a healthy mind, you are set to becoming increasingly better at what you're aiming for. And I think this can be extrapolated to a society as well. If the framework of the society is a resilient or even anti fragile system, and I highlight the importance of anti fragility by your concept of the society being decentralized. A decentralized system that works, that is viable, is much more resilient and perhaps even much more anti fragile than a centralized system. In a centralized system, you just need to cut off the central core and the whole thing falls apart. In a decentralized system, you would need to knock out several subsystems until it starts falling apart. But if it is a decentralized system that has kind of like the DNA of the entire system in each of the subcomponents, exactly like a biomimicry of what happens in a multicellular organism, every single cell in your body has the instructions for a new human being in potential. We can potentially pick off a flake of skin cell, and through the learnings of biology, we can transform that cell into a cell that can become any organ of the human body, or it could even become a germ cell. It could become a germ cell that could produce an entire human being. And so, if when building your society with its subsystems, and the subsystems are extremely important because of it being decentralized. If the subsystems are composed kind of like a community of persons that is a kind of a hologram of the entire thing, where if something wrong happens, like an earthquake or a catastrophe or whatnot, they have the instructions to kind of rebuild the thing, to regenerate, or even to when hardships happen. For instance, severe weather makes crops yields much lower. People have the anti fragility to become tougher, to ration all the resources so as to redistribute the resources so that everyone can kind of survive the winter, even if they fast a lot more. And so everyone is kind of shouldering the hardships more or less equally or as equally as possible, so that when spring comes, there is still a society alive. And so I think these kinds of concepts of resilience and anti-fragility work very well in sync with the fact that you're aiming for a decentralized society.
Yeah, absolutely they do. I mean, yeah, we're on the right path, that's for sure. I mean, the mind baffles why the internet went the direction it did. I remember I was tinkering with the internet back in 2000. Well, I first started working in 1998, I think it was. And I remember I was at uni at the time. I left uni and I just went straight into working in the internet world. And I just thought this is just like going to be so good. Like in the future, I could just see where it could go. And then come 2005, and when the kind of the whole kind of like cloud computing thing kind of kicked off, and then following that, the emergence of big social platforms, the internet just went in a really crap direction, didn't it? And it turned in from being this amazing, potentially amazing resource to kind of democratize the world in terms of make everything a much better system, like 'cause that's what the internet's got the potential to do. It's what it should do. It should connect everything and everybody all around the world, just kind of like peer to peer. Yeah, but as soon as the kind of the big tech kind of Silicon Valley kind of concentration of wealth and then kind of domination of services came about, the kind of internet just went into this completely awful direction, which is focused on take it is focused on data and owning the data. It's focused on making people addicted to these platforms, which are feeding their already kind of insecure personalities with kind of targeted algorithms, which are not really putting their kind of like the best interest of humanity at top of the table, rather just making more money. So again, it's all the whole system has just gone down the wrong direction. So I'm heartened to know that the fact that with the kind of advent of this new wave of internet, kind of like people are calling Web3, um, we're taking the best bits of Web 1 and the best bits of Web 2 in terms of it's kind of going back to basics in many respects, and kind of it's going away from that kind of polished approach where everything's shiny and super professional, to the extent whereby only a company that's been invested $1 billion in Silicon Valley is able to produce these complexities and so on and so forth, to the extent whereby right now so much of the technology which is which was being the kind of in the restricted hands of a few over the course of the last few years is now opening up into kind of broader availability, so much so that we can build systems comparable to what these big tech companies would have been able to do amongst ourselves, just as a kind of a community, an online community, in no time whatsoever. So that's the kind of formation of this society that we're creating. It's like we're building this out, but we're building this thing out ourselves as a community. There's not going to be any corporate ownership. There's not going to be any centralization of decision making. Rather, a system, a structure which enables us to build out the things that we need to do in order for our society to exist, and delivered and executed through a governance and identity layer that kind of works in the best interest of everybody to make that happen. So I think a lot of the things that you've been talking about there before kind of will be answered by this kind of new blueprint for a kind of decentralized society that we're kind of collaborating on to building ourselves together.
Yeah, for sure. There are problems, and there will be problems and challenges that will arise that may be technical or psychological or social in nature, might be related to interpersonal relationships, might be related to good practices in society and whatnot, that no single individual might have the answer, and probably the answer will emerge by collaboration, which is some of the most beautiful aspects of basically society building, state building, and whatnot. Um, as I've said, Mood, I am at your disposal to act as an advisor, to give my inputs, to by drawing from what I hope are the best ideas that I've been collecting from thinkers, the best thinkers of human history. If I say something that is useful for you and your society, it is very likely due to the excellence of these giants upon whom I'm standing on their shoulders. And probably if I say something that won't work or is foolish, it is on me. And so you can count on me for these kinds of challenges, for dealing with these kinds of challenges in the future. It is a superbly exciting prospect to be creating something where we kind of express ourselves, where we kind of channel the wisdom from these ancient thinkers, where we might have timeless wisdom. And imagine how excellent of social systems that can be created if we manage to merge the best ideas human beings have created since the dawn of civilization that have survived to our days with the best that digital and information technology we have at our disposal nowadays. These two things merged, I think that we can really foster a reformation of society uh, that is entirely peaceful, that is entirely harmonious, where we can kind of simultaneously um, apply therapy to people so that they can become better individuals that can become thoroughly more themselves instead of just being puppets of a centralized system. And also, if you figure out a way to attract teachers that might be frustrated in their public schools or even some private schools, where at least in my country there are many teachers that are frustrated with how the system works. If you can figure out how to attract them so that they may contribute to attracting pupils to your society that will kind of go through this process of at least earlier education and arrive at being functional citizens, viable citizens. You will have if you have a system composed of viable components, your system will be viable itself. And this is one lesson that I draw from another exceptional thinker from basically our days. He has passed away a few years ago. He was called Stafford Beer, and I also hugely recommend his concepts and teachings. He also um, made architecture of systems, of organizations, of society that have different components that function like a human being has different organs, and the organs complement each other, and they each have their own role and specialization. And there's roles of regulation of the systems. Human beings have what we call homeostasis. When we eat sugar, the different components of our body work in synchronous to avoid sugar levels to rise too much. And there is a kind of like a dampening system, a dampening effect to keep things within ideal bounds. And so, if you have a society where price stability is also kind of homeostatic, it's kind of stable, even if there are external challenges to the system, you will have you will be much more in a better position for your society to work well. Instead of, for example, in history, when the Soviets tried to isolate themselves from capitalism and try to forcefully regulate the entire thing top down, they failed miserably, of course, because the central core of the system was tended to accumulate trash, which was in the form of extremely narcissistic individuals, extremely crony and corrupt individuals, of course. And now it has been something connected to the ideology per se. And so it was just a matter of time for external influences that wanted to bring the system down to just put in check the central core, and the whole thing came down in the, I think was the 70s or 80s. And so if you're trying to build a system, do not commit the mistake of attaching yourself too hardly, too resolutely to an ideological system. Attach your society to systems that are boiled down to the essentials of what it means to be human, of what it means to be a society. And I think you will succeed. And I truly hope that you succeed and others like you also succeed, because this is something that is so, it's such a huge challenge. It's such a moonshot of a challenge, probably over the concept of a moonshot, that we need the best, the most technically proficient persons working hard at this nowadays, so that we can transition from a system that is absolutely centralized beyond recognition, is composed of individuals that unfortunately were not raised to be self aware of their limitations and correct them on themselves. Um, People that are using the best of technology that there is, for instance, the internet and smartphones, to entertain themselves, to numb themselves of the pain of being in a society that really just doesn't care about them. They're disenfranchised. Um, I don't know how much of a proportion there is of the internet that is just dedicated to um, basically pleasure and numbness of the senses. I'm talking about things like pornography, video games, and whatnot. A huge part of the web is dedicated to these things. And it is basically a symptom of what is going on with individuals. And so the situation in which individuals are right now need to be addressed as basically the foundations or the first building blocks of the Sublime Society, I think.
Yeah, I do. I think that's a sage word as always, sir. Um, Also, yeah, thanks for kind of offering to participate in the creation of it as well, because I think the there's so I mean there's huge amounts to unpack with what you've just been going through there, but all of it is I couldn't agree more with. And I think this whole concept of philosophy vibes as a core part of the community to really foster this kind of community of thinking. I mean, obviously philosophy is not going to be for everybody, but I do think from a societal perspective there should be more, there should be more discussion around it. And it just doesn't really exist to the extent that it should do within society, just because for the points that we've raised before, everybody's just been kind of programmed, and the whole society is geared towards mind control, and that's through through education, that's through our governments, but it's also through the media. And half the reason why those things you've just been speaking about exist within society to distract people is the whole kind of bread and circuses thing, and we as a society have created this system whereby there's just so much blah everywhere, every turn, every corner you go, and it's all distraction. The worst at one end of the spectrum is just like an unneeded distraction, but at the other end of the spectrum it's much more sinister than that. It's kind of brain mind control, literally just kind of controlling the masses to a large extent. So I think, this concept of fostering kind of a community and of thinkers, and creating people like such as yourselves coming into it, and helping foster these new communities of just people who are collaborating, meeting directly via the internet within these sub communities, and then we can build out loads of those sub communities, but they all operate as a part of a kind of a more broader Sublime Society framework. There's the potential to really, to do a lot of positive good here. There really is. So I'm very grateful that you offer kind of your time to help kind of guide it, because that's what's needed right now. We're doing this very much together. We're building the concept out right now, and it's already going. But we this is a group effort, and the more people that are kind of getting involved and participating in whatever communities or whatever part of it, the better it will be for all of us in the long term.
Just to close, I would like to address what you've said, that maybe philosophy is not for, perhaps not for everyone. I would like to demonstrate that it is for everyone, in the sense that if philosophy is means loving the truth or loving wisdom, every single person can benefit, even if not just for the wisdom of becoming more self aware of themselves, or having more self knowledge. If you know yourself better, you are in a better position to take the reins of your life and plan your life instead of sticking to someone else's plan. And so, yeah, I think this is an extremely um, enriching challenge that you have here for yourself, for myself, and probably for many other individuals to express their creativity, express their wisdom, express their qualities of character, and even express their love for building something that will help others, to contribute to others. And I have hopes for the future that things like this can help take us out of this social and economical rut in which we are right now, and serve as a base for us to reach for the stars, like people who are who were extremely inspiring to me, like Carl Sagan and Isaac Asimov would often talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so yeah, good chatting, sir. Appreciated it as always. And yeah, we should do more in the future, because I think there's a lot to talk about, and as this thing grows and builds out, it'd be good to kind of constantly kind of keep a dialogue going, and yeah, just hopefully inspire some more people to get involved.